Welcome to District TT, another episode of this fascinating show. We are devoted to sending you programs, hard talk, on the ground and in our studios. All right, Mr. Darryl Naranjit, how are you?
Not too bad, not too bad.
All right, Darryl is a philosopher,
Okay.
he's a mathematician, and
Yeah.
he's a musician.
Yeah.
And he's written all of these books on philosophy. And I want to go through the books because I think it's an important contribution to the intellectual life of modern society and the planet. So we don't want them to be ignored, Darryl.
Okay.
So the first one that you wrote was The Righteous State. This is it, right? This is The Righteous State. Yeah. And when was it that you wrote this?
It was written in 1987.
Published in Trinidad?
Published in Trinidad.
What is it about?
It's basically about my conception of what the just state should be like. Some ideas about the just state in terms of the type of political society we have at present, at that time.
So you have looked at Plato. What are the other philosophers that you've looked at? Because in Trinidad we don't really know exactly what is a philosophy. They don't understand who are these philosophers. Who are these philosophers whom you've looked at through your career?
Okay, I've started up with Nietzsche, started my quotation from Nietzsche. Anti-Plato.
All
He
right.
considered himself as the philosopher who would replace Plato in the philosophical firmament.
All right. So could you explain the dialectic?
Explain that.
Yeah, that trying to trump and overthrow
Yeah.
Plato. What is the meaning of Platonic philosophy versus Nietzschean philosophy?
Yeah, Platonic philosophy really believed in what he called the good, and there was a sort of mixture of Plato and Christianity, which Nietzsche called Christianity called Platonism for the masses. So that mixture of Platonism and Christianity and the sort of values that it advocated is what Nietzsche placed himself against, right?
He came along at a certain point in Western history.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Western civilization, Western economics and politics. He was generated by that society.
Yeah.
In other words, the society created him. So he was saying, I suppose, to an extent, what the society desired of him to say. And what was it that they desired of him to say at that point in Western history?
Yeah, well, more than, I would say there's a break between that Platonic Christian view of life, worldview, and it started off with Machiavelli, who another philosopher called the teacher of evil. He thought that man and society should be looked at not from what it ought to be, but what it is. And his conception of what man is was a sort of very, not very virtuous type of person. The people who came after sort of built on that. And so you had a concept of man that was detached from his, you could call it ethical mores, if you want to call it that, and who would could be justified for his love of power and wealth, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So and at that time, as we talk about the historical circumstance, at that time, Europe was in this aggressive, expansive phase, going out the so-called discovery of America and the rest of the world, and it was an aggressive, imperialist type of phase. So this philosophy really suited those particular activities, you know, and it justified it.
So they needed to throw out Plato. They needed to throw out Plato in the Republic. And the concept of the ideal enlightened monarch.
Yes, right.
Because it didn't suit what was going to happen
What
on
was
the ground
yeah.
in terms of imperialism and so on.
Yeah.
So that's a righteous state.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then after that, well, I juxtaposed that with the newly independent countries that were fighting against colonialism, and said that they had a different view, and they tried to explain the humanistic aspect of man. So you had two different views of what man
So their
is.
views were more akin to Plato.
Yeah, that's what I argued for.
Yeah. So Gandhian philosophy, for
Gandhian
example,
philosophy, yes.
was more modeled on the Plato humanistic philosophy.
Yeah.
And talk about Gandhi a bit.
His view was that that civilization wasn't really about the construction of huge buildings and that type of thing, but it was really judged by behavior, moral behavior. So civilization had to be judged by moral behavior or ethical behavior.
So you wrote the book Truth and Power.
Yeah.
This is a book that you wrote about Gandhi's political philosophy.
Right.
And are you going to explain what he is saying? I mean, all the...
Right. So Gandhi, in a sense, overthrew the British Empire. And so I was trying to find out, well, what is the source of his power that enabled him to overthrow the British Empire? And I thought that it came from really what he said it was, which is satyagraha, the force of truth. So to me, the important aspect of his philosophy was an emphasis on truth, as opposed to what he found British civilization, Western civilization, was saying at that time, teaching at that time, because they considered themselves to be the purveyors of civilization and true civilization, and they were bringing up these undeveloped countries to a state of civilization, and that was the mission to civilize the world, I guess. And what Gandhi was saying was that, well, he looked at the truth of what they were doing, and he looked at the truth of what civilization should be, and he found that this wasn't civilization. It was in fact like a wolf, and it was just an exploitative sort of system that was just preying upon weaker countries, and because of their love for power and wealth.
All right, so he didn't see truth as relative. He stood on truth.
Right.
He stood on the needle point of truth.
Right.
Which wasn't really a Gandhian philosophy. He didn't couch that philosophy. That's part of all traditional Sanskrit and Bhagavad Gita doctrine,
Right.
taught in schools and so on.
Right.
So he basically upheld the value of truth. Could you tell us about this truth versus a kind of relativistic truth which was now emerging in the West?
Right. Well, the view of Nietzsche, and if we want to understand Nietzsche, we have to go back probably to the ideas of Descartes and Kant, and Kant's really view of assessment of reality was that the mind was constitutive of reality. We process reality through our internal categories, and because of that, it was like if we were wearing sunglasses or type of colored glasses, and so what we saw about reality was colored by those glasses. We couldn't reach that thing in itself. We could only talk about the phenomenal aspect. And so Nietzsche came along and said, well, if we can't know the thing in itself, why even bother to talk about it? So he threw out the thing in itself and just talk about phenomenal reality. And so reality is a matter of perspectives. We may have different perspectives about reality, but there's no text, there's only subtext. So what we have is no absolute truth about things, but just perspectives about things.
So that if you set up your military and your cavalry to invade America, that is not fundamentally wrong.
Right.
It's relativistic because they're wrong too, because they're savages, and you have a
Right.
moral duty to convert them.
Right.
So in that context, anything goes. Anything is
goes.
justifiable.
Right.
So that basically explains the logic and the rationalization of the ideology of conquest.
Right. Because as Dostoevsky said about that whole thing, if God is dead, then anything is possible. Everything is permissible.
Yes.
You know.
But Gandhi didn't hold to that.
No.
He held to truth.
He held to the
That
idea that there is truth, and the whole process of philosophy is to seek that truth. And there is a truth out there, and we have to seek that truth, and we have to become as a cipher, as he says. We have to get rid of our ego, reduce our whatever our internal interpretation, and try to get to the truth. And so that was his whole view of truth.
And on that basis, he was able to advance his cause against the British Empire.
Right.
Because he was able to deconstruct them. And
Right.
he was saying, no, this is the truth.
Right.
This is the undivided, indisputable truth.
Right. And he was also saying that truth is, we must have the courage not only to speak the truth, but to be able to see the truth. And when you have this sort of system where you have an aggressor who is powerful and strong, we sometimes are afraid to see the truth. And so what he's saying is we must have that courage to see the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
This is another one of the communication, intention, and reality. Kind of the amount of gaps it has. The amount of gaps there are between the speaker and the receiver, and those gaps eventually dissipate meaning. So is that what you're dealing with here? Or is this just by projecting my views on what you're saying?
What I'm dealing with is a sort of philosophy of language generated by people like Bertrand Russell, and what it was called was language was a sort of mirror of reality. So if we want to find out about reality, all we have to do is be able to find out about language, and that mirrors reality, so we can find reality or know about reality by examining the language. And that was, I guess, one of the ways to attack the idea of perspectivism and the fact that we can't get to the thing in itself. So Russell is saying, well, if we look at language, language is a mirror of that thing in itself, of reality. And so if we can examine and deconstruct language, we'll be able to know about reality. And Wittgenstein, later on in his first book, he tried to follow that path, and he found that it didn't really work. Language wasn't like that. Language wasn't a matter of mirroring reality at all, but language was doing other things, and language was in fact a type of game, a type of gameplay. And so in this book I tried to look at language from the aspect of it being a game, and it's having an objective. As in every game there's an objective, and looking at the objective of the game. And what I call that objective was the intention. So when we speak a sentence, there is an intention behind the sentence, and to really understand what you're saying, you have to understand the intention, not just the words. And so when I look at the last part of that book, I looked at the media, and I what I said was the media constructs reality for us, and it constructs reality by sort of using language to sort of generate these particular games or whatever.
So we come on to an American agenda. The subtitle is Leo Strauss, Nietzsche, and Neoconservatism. So what is the American agenda?
Well,
what is the language and what is the intention?
Right. In this book, I'm looking at neoconservatism, which I consider one American agenda of the will to live, of the will to life. What should I say of passing on these CNN and other Western media type views of reality.
It's a clone.
It's a clone.
Yeah.
And so that's what we are getting.
And the tragedy is that our people who were in the same system, slavery and indentureship and so on, their own lands and native cultures and identities were robbed. They keep on believing in the same old narrative. They haven't changed. They still believe and they still support the same old narratives.
Yes.
And I think that's the tragedy of the modern Caribbean.
Yes.
They cannot see it for what it is. They cannot see the meaning behind the intention.
Yeah,
they can't deconstruct the language of BBC.
Right.
So this is the book, The American Agenda. And then we have this one, Ideological Warfare.
Yeah, this deals with what I call the economic weapon, and the economic weapon of the West, which is one of its powerful weapons. And I think its three main weapons are militaristic arsenal, and also the media, and then economics.
Banking system.
The banking system and the financial system. And the economics, it has developed the economic weapon because of the global institutions it has created over time. For example, the World Bank, the IMF, and other economic institutions. And in this way, it can use those institutions as a weapon to subdue and force, especially smaller nations, to go along with its agendas and so on. If you don't do it this way, well, then we will either sanction you or we'll hold back funds from you through the IMF or World Bank, and in that way you will just starve. And so it's what it seeks to do is what Manley used to call it sort of create sufferation amongst the people.
Who is that? Manley?
Manley.
Norman Manley, yeah. Prime Minister of Jamaica.
Yeah, Prime Minister. And so when people are suffering, they will throw out their governments and so on. And therefore the governments have to ensure that these institutions don't create this sufferation amongst the people, so they have to go along with what they're saying.
All right. Some economists, modern economists, tailor to suit. They would say, well, the World Bank and the IMF, they have been reformed and they're better. They reformed themselves. What is your view of that?
Yeah, well, because of the great criticism by the masses of people of the IMF and the World Bank, and the fact that instead of spreading any type of advancement, progress for the people, it has spread inequality, and there's a lot of work that was done on the inequality spread by the policies of World Bank and IMF. So they tried to soften that, and because of the criticism, and they tried to put a nice coat on what they're doing. But I think the fundamental aim is really the same.
Now, it seems to me that hegemony, that economic hegemony and political, military hegemony, media, is now being challenged by China, Russia. That's why Obama found it fit to leave the devastation which he had helped to create in the Middle East and pivot to China. That was his word, pivot to China.
Yes, yes.
So China is the next main target.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that America will not give up its hegemony. It seems that it will not give up its dominance. And it will prefer to mash up the whole game of marbles than give up a single marble. And that is as far as NATO is concerned and America is concerned. And therefore, I foresee an impending war with China. Because I don't think Russia and China are going to give up marbles. I don't think they have the temperament for that, or the understanding of the problem is so subtle. They're not going to give up the marbles, and there is going to be, and America is not going to. So they're heading for a third world war. And that's going to happen, I think, between 2040 and 2050. That's my view. What do you think of that?
And it's a kind of insanity. Eh? There was a time, for example, during the Kennedy years, and you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the whole idea of a nuclear war was something to be avoided. And so when that incident came about, there were always quite an attempt to defuse it and to get back to a situation where there would be some possibility of peace. But now it seems like various people, and mostly the neocons, and it's really something that's driven by neocon ideology, they seem to think that a nuclear war is winnable. I don't know how, through what sort of insanity they think that, and that is what is driving it. They think nuclear war is winnable, and it's not. It's not winnable. Maybe they think that Russia will back down, or these countries will, because they've had a history. After Vietnam, for instance, when America had this great defeat in Vietnam, when Reagan came in, he started off small. He attacked some small countries, Grenada, Nicaragua, the bigger ones like Iraq and other countries, and even in Europe. And by this, they felt this sort of military kind of invincibility, and that's what's playing out now. They have the sense of military invincibility, and it's a delusion. It's a real delusion.
And the American record is clear. I mean, once you know the record, then you know how they will behave. I think perhaps one of the things which is standing in their way right now is Trump. He may get back into office, but by 2030, when he goes, if he's in office, he goes, that there will be a collusion between the Democrats and the Republicans for this 21st century, to win the 21st century economically and militarily. And I think that 10 years will be a very hectic 10 years, the 2030s, like the 1930s, and there'll be war between the 40s and 50s. That's my prediction, and that's how I feel that the world. And therefore, we need, as people in the third world, to prepare for that.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like where it's going. And people in the third world have to prepare, and also have to decide what sides they're on and how is it possible to really stop this.
Two nuclear weapons could have war on either side. That's the end of everything.
Yeah. So
what side? It doesn't matter whose side you're on again. I would assume.
Yeah.
That's the end of it.
Right. And therefore, the people of the world have to really realize: well, do you want destruction or do you want to survive as a species?
Just wrote, it's actually smelling like ink. Smelling like ink. I'm a bibliophile now. So I love books, and I love the smell and taste and the material aspects of books, text, everything.
Yeah.
The Post-Truth Society. Tell us about this book.
Yeah, the Post-Truth Society is my sort of description of the evolution of that struggle between two views, really. One which is the will to power, and the other one which is the Platonic one, which we talked about, the idea of justice and so on. And what I'm trying to trace is how it developed over the years, and how we reach a stage where that the truth is not considered to be possible. And so we're in a post-truth world where the alternative facts, as they say. And so anything goes, any description of reality goes. So, for example, when we're looking at the war that's going on now in Ukraine, our reports of what's going on there is post-truth. We don't know what's really happening. We have no idea of what's happening. And so we're living in a world where truth has almost disappeared, or in fact has disappeared. And that's the sort of governing ideology or philosophy.
So what is the truth of the truth teller? What is the fate of the truth teller?
The truth teller is like the prophet of old now. And the prophet was given a mission to tell the truth, and people would either listen or not listen. And if they didn't listen, according to the various sources, they would face destruction. So people have given a choice. In fact, a good description would be the philosophy is like the watchman. A watchman, he's out there looking on, and he's got to announce to the world what's happening, what is happening. And if he doesn't, the blood is on his hands, you know. And if he does, people may fall into destruction, but the blood is not on his hands. So that's the fate of the philosopher. He has to announce the truth, and whether people would listen or go to the discussion is up to them. But he has his duty to announce that truth.
Teller, give a synopsis of your ideas in these books. What would you say that you've been trying to do? What would be your project?
Yeah.
What would be the Darryl Naranjit's project?
Yeah, that's very interesting, man. I haven't thought about that, and there's two quotations I think that really sum it up. One is by Samuel Beckett, in the ending days and nights of unending melancholy, love it is at last unites. And the other one is by Rihanna, How to Find Love in a Hopeless Place. And I think that's what my quest has been, and my whole work has been all about, how to find love in the world where love seems to be such a hopeless thing.
All right, and these books are available at Amazon?
Yeah, they're available at Amazon.
Yeah, and perhaps soon to be Metropolitan Publishers.
Yes.
And RAP to Avenue. All right, well, thanks very much for listening. This is Darryl Naranjit. He's a very audacious philosopher. He sits in a den and he meditates, and he comes up with all these luscious, precious ideas. And I hope that the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the West and the planet listen to such ideas, and because he's a modern philosopher with true grit and true integrity, and true vision. Thanks very much. Welcome to District TT, another episode of this fascinating show. We are devoted to sending you programs, hard talk, on the ground and in our studios.